Where the idea for Kill Wolfy come from? Oh man, um, I love it when people ask that question. It's got a long answer, but I'll definitely answer it. Um, so Kill Wolfy is the last in a long line of ideas that I was trying to fucking turn into a film that would just be about racism without having to directly be about racism because I have no desire to directly depict racism in my content. It is too fucking triggering for me, especially lately. Um, so I had um, but like throughout college, I had this web comic called Sheep Shit that no one should read, but it is on the internet. And Kill Wolfy was supposed to be like this offshoot of it, where it was just about these sheep anthros, fucking like basically like doing dumb shit, like pretty much like whatever, just meme comedy, whatever popped into my fucking head. And I got an idea to where like I wanted to make one that depicted racism in in like a Looney Tunes kind of animal style, like like cute animals or whatever, or like at least animal anthros, Looney Tunes style. It wasn't always like cute, but like um, so I did this throughout college. I kept fucking with this idea because I was a little furry curious, and I was like just wanting to talk about racism in my work, but often felt kind of weird about it because I've had an interesting relationship with racism growing up because I spent the first 12 years of my life having like almost no contact with white people whatsoever. Like I grew up in Detroit and Southfield, the suburb right next to Detroit, and both of those places, at least when I was growing up, were 90% black, and then there were like some Chaldeans, um, around there as well, who were from Iraq, I believe. I'm gonna feel so stupid if I'm not remembering correctly, but like they're like a Catholic subculture of Iraqi people, and there's a bunch of them in the Metro Detroit area. So like I had like no experience dealing with white people whatsoever, and except for like what I saw on TV. And then when I was like 12, me and my mom moved to Flint, which is for because she got a job there, and this fucking place um, was easily as broke as like Southfield or Detroit, but it was just like no experiences with white people whatsoever ever, and then like just thrown into a pit with the meanest white people you could possibly fucking imagine. Like they were so mean, like fucking like, oh my god, they used to like the moment that they realized, because see like the black people in Flint, they get called niggers all the time. They don't fucking care. Like I don't want to talk about like all of them, but like the ones that I saw growing up, like the white people around there would kind of just say whatever the fuck they wanted to them, and because like the black people there were so used to that shit, they kind of just like would just eat it. They had like a sense of humor about it, which I just did not fucking understand. Cause like it was the first time I like really came face to face with the idea that I was a fucking minority, was when kids at school were suddenly calling me a nigger all the fucking time, just because they knew that it would get me fucking riled up. So after like dealing with this shit for fucking 3 years, um, I kind of like, it kind of gave me like a weird kind of like trauma response to white people for a long time, because of this shit. Because I was getting into fist fights with them at school. You know, they did everything in their power to get me to fly off the handle because they thought that shit was funny. You know, and coming from a fucking black neighborhood where like, you know, in a fucking all black neighborhood, it's kind of more about being tough. You know, like when you're a kid, um, it's like who's the, you know, who's a tough kid or whatever. Like, you know, showing people that they shouldn't fuck with you or whatever by, you know, knocking niggas the fuck out or whatever. And that was what I was fucking used to growing up. And I got to Flint, and like it was this massive fucking culture shock for me because I had just never dealt with white people before. And so, you know, they thought that shit was funny that I was like offended when they called me a nigger, which is in retrospect, I'm just like, cool, nice fucking sense of humor. But I stayed around that, and I was starting to get on the internet at the time, and every, you know, that 4chan humor that also has a lot of like, you know, like sport racism in it, was kind of like there also. You know, like it was like I was getting it in real life, at school as a kid, as a teenager growing up, and at on the internet where I was like in these art scenes and on these like forums and shit, like Newgrounds and all this stuff. It was full of a bunch of the same types of kids I was fucking brawling with, you know, at school as a fucking teenager. So I had developed this kind of like at first it was like really weird and like horrifying, and then after a while I got really used to it. And I decided to myself that I was like, oh yeah, like okay, I get it. You know, the only thing you have to do with white people is just like not let them be able to like fucking offend you or whatever, you know. And this is how you avoid getting into a fight with white people is you don't show, you know, emotion or like offense, because they don't care if you're the toughest. They're like the white kids I went to school with growing up, when I went to Flint, were trying to get me to attack them by, you know, being racist towards me, so that I like, so like kind of hoping to like get my goat so that I could fly off the handle for their entertainment. And I basically learned to like swallow racism when I fucking saw it, and didn't want to respond to it because I was like, oh well, you know, like fucking, you know, respond to racism, get clowned even harder, get beat up, get jumped, you know, because you fucking flew off the handle because somebody called you, you know, the N word or said something racist or nasty to you. And the older I got, I started to realize, you know, what a weird fucking thing this was, especially when I left the Flint area and moved to Lansing, which was equally full of white people, but they were just a lot more like chill and like not racist. They like not nearly in the same numbers. I had very few. There were definitely a few, but like not nearly as many like racist interactions. For the God, how long did I live in Lansing? Like fucking like 5 years. I was in Flint for 3 years. So anyway, um, after that, I like it, like when I moved there, I started, you know, making more friends, and like the kids around me were like a lot nicer, and I started that like trauma response that I had had to like racist white kids, had kind of started to dissipate, and I started to care. Like I started to kind of like just be like, oh, okay, you know, like this is like a thing that like happens in some places, or like it's, you know, racism is real, and like obviously if these kids are going to school and acting like this, you know, they are definitely like kind of from at least a very unempathetic ilk, if not a genuinely racist one. And but I basically made Kill Wolfy. I came up with Kill Wolfy to basically say, like, they're like to basically a make fun of the way that I fucking responded to my trauma response to like racism growing up by basically having Shepard be like representative of like this idea. Like he's like, oh, like sheep are, sheep are terrible, they're oversensitive and yada yada, because these were the things that I fucking told myself growing up in order to cope with the racism that I dealt with. I would tell myself, like, oh, like if you're just not oversensitive, or like if you're, like if you're more like, if you can just be thicker skinned or whatever, like you can deal with racism. And in the Kill Wolfy universe, it's dealing with being eaten, or whatever, or dealing with like living with your natural predator, basically. And but to basically show like you can get close to you can like get really close to like the majority, and find people in the majority that you love, and that intersectionality is extremely fucking important, but also that racism still very much exists, and no matter how much you fucking ignore it, or no matter how many, like, this is gonna sound harsh, but I promise, like, the meaning is the intersectionality. If it's not fucking obvious, it's like no matter how many good white people you meet, and no matter how you learn to love them or understand or empathize with each other, racism is still always just gonna be a fact of fucking American life. Everybody thinks racism is over until you're a fucking black kid who gets knocked the fuck out and spat on and called a nigger by a fucking white kid 1.5 your times fucking feet times your fucking size, you know. But if you haven't experienced that, or if you aren't black at all, then it's very easy to just be like, oh, racism doesn't fucking exist. It's all just words. People are being oversensitive or whatever. But you know, you can fight off. Shepard fighting off the other sheep was basically a representation of me, like, trying to cope with racism by trying to be above it. And I've just never. But you get older and you realize you're never above racism. The system, the world, society, all way fucking bigger than you. So, you know, Adolf is a representation of all of the great, like, friends that I've made, since I became exposed to white people. But um they get on the plane. He gets on the plane with all the fucking wolves after knocking out his own people and like talking shit about them and all this stuff. And all these wolves just want to eat him, exactly like he was basically, just like on that fucking copium about how, like, he was coping with being preyed upon, by basically like victim blaming his own people. And but at the end of the day, like, that shit was still real. He is very much still at their mercy. And even if he's with somebody that is in the majority that he loves, who will protect him, he is still at the mercy of predation or racism. uh so that's where I got the that's Kill Wolfy. That's what Kill Wolfy's about. That's what inspired it. Um, and also, to just show, like, white allies, like, look, the same thing. It's like, love obviously does exist between black and white people, and it should exist more. And we need it. Like, we need this empathy. We need to understand each other and work together, and to intersect. But you know, uh, we need help. Don't be complicit. Like, don't sit there. Don't be apathetic. Like fucking help, because, like, there are just forms of this shit that, like, nobody can even fathom unless you are on a certain end of that shit. And honestly, the worst part about this is that you cannot convince most motherfuckers that racism still exists to this day. So yeah, love each other regardless of race, and don't get high on that fucking copium. Be real with yourself. We're all fucking weak to it, and we all have responsibilities in it. And yeah, that's the inspiration for Kill Wolfy. That's why I made that movie. And the second one is, I don't know if I did a really good job of getting that theme across. I was not as good of a writer back then. You know, obviously, because it was fucking what 5 years ago, 6 years ago that I wrote it. But that was the inspiration, and that is that's what happened.